Hey guys, so welcome to Platypus or Platytube U.S. History, and I'm actually going to pick up on fighting the revolution right after Lexington and Concord because I feel like we got through that pretty well. So we're going to start with the Battle of Ticonderoga. Now, Ticonderoga was actually a really important fort because it was positioned to cut the colonies in half. Now, this is a bad idea if you're the colonies. You don't want a key fort splitting your resources. So what they do is the colonists decide that they're going to go in, and they're going to go in their first offensive action of the Revolutionary War, and they decide that they're going to take this fort. Now, the colonists are led by Benedict Arnold, who is the leader of the Massachusetts militia, and Ethan Allen, who is the leader of the Green Mountain Men from Vermont. From New Hampshire. And they decide that they're going to combine forces and they're going to come in from different angles, but they've decided that they're going to use a tactic that will be used again in the Revolutionary War, and they're going to surprise the British in their beds. They're going to come at them before they even wake up. So by the time the British wake up at Fort Ticonderoga, the American colonists are there, and they're basically pointing guns at them saying, "You're going to surrender right now." And so the British are like, "Sure, okay, we surrender. Please don't shoot me." And they go ahead and take all those people prisoner. So we've got some prisoners of war at this point. Now, here's why Ticonderoga is even more important than just because of its really nice real estate value. It also has cannons. Now, this is something that the American colonists don't have. They don't have cannons. Remember, they're low on supplies. They don't have an entire armament behind them. They don't have a whole lot of money to buy these things either. So, taking Ticonderoga will allow them to gain artillery, long-range artillery, which is super important and will come into play later on in the Revolutionary War. Now from there, we're going to have the Battle of Bunker's Hill. And at the Battle of Bunker's Hill, the way Boston works is it has like it's kind of in a valley, and it has a couple of hills on the outskirts of it or around it. And one of them is Bunker's Hill and one of them is Breed's Hill. And what ends up happening is Wade, the leader of the colonists, is ordered to go and take Bunker's Hill before the British can, because what needs to happen is the colonists have already set up almost a blockade of militia around Boston to try and prevent the British from coming inland again and attacking like they did with Lexington and Concord. So the idea is that the colonists would take a elevated position at Bunker's Hill. Now Wade looks and he kind of analyzes the situation, and he said, okay, look, Bunker's Hill is higher, it's taller, it's harder to access, but Breed's Hill, it's not as tall, but it still has a great vantage point as far as, putting cannons on Boston. Boston is still within cannon range. So he decides instead to go to take Breed's Hill, and then he and his men, they work through the night to dig and fortify and create an earthen fort that's 160 feet long and 30 feet high through the night. So when the British wake up the next morning and they look over at Breed's Hill and they're like, "Oh my God, what's happening over there? I don't understand. Maybe we should go attack." General Howe decides that he's going to use a very British approach to this, and he's like, okay, well, the way we fight is we create multiple pronged attacks around, and we try and attack from multiple sides. But what General Howe seems to have forgotten is like the key military strategy that the person with the higher vantage point actually has a better advantage. And here's the thing. So General Howe, he decides he's going to send two lines up the hill at the same time as a way to kind of distract them and divert their forces and divide their forces, which isn't necessarily a bad idea, except the colonists knew what was coming because they had the higher vantage point. The only problem is that the colonists were very low on ammunition and they were outnumbered. So as a way to alleviate those disadvantages, they decided that they were going to not just shoot willy-nilly and pray to God that they hit something. They were going to wait until the British troops were within range and close. So you get the phrase, "you wait until you see the whites of their eyes," from the Battle of Bunker's Hill, because they had to conserve gunpowder and they had to conserve ammunition, so they had to make every shot count. Now, unfortunately, ultimately, the Battle of Bunker's Hill is seen as technically a loss for the Americans because they do have to retreat, because they do run out of ammunition, and they are severely outnumbered, because Boston is like a stronghold for the British troops. So they have to retreat down the hill. In the meantime, General Howe has sent yet another prong up the hill in a different direction to also be mowed down. So even though technically we had to retreat from the battle, the colonists had to retreat from the battle, it's still considered a huge victory for the Americans because, remember, we're fighting a defensive war, and the only point that we have to make is that we're not going anywhere, and we're not leaving. We're not giving up. So the fact that the British took such heavy losses in the Battle of Bunker's Hill is going to come as a huge shock to them, because remember, they're way overconfident in their abilities, and they completely underestimate the abilities of the colonists. Now here's the thing about the colonists. Remember, they're rugged individuals, right? So they know how to shoot. They've been hunting. They know how to actually sit in a tree and shoot someone from far away. So these are advantages that they have. But here are the numbers after the Battle of Bunker's Hill. The British, 226 dead and 828 wounded, over 1,000 casualties on the British side, versus the U.S. that only had 140 dead, which is still a lot, but not huge, and 271 wounded. Now, the Battle of Bunker's Hill is by no means a small battle. People die, people get hurt, but look at those numbers. I mean, the Americans, because of their defensive position overall, the fact that they had significantly fewer casualties will lead to this being seen as a victory for the American colonists. At least that's how the colonists see it. And it's bolstering to the colonists' revolution and movement. Now, after this, King George, Mad King George, Crazy King George, he is going to declare America in rebellion. He catches on quick. And so he decides that he is going to hire Hessian mercenaries. He's going to buy paid soldiers. But remember what one of the advantages of the American colonists was, is that they were fighting for a cause. You can't compete, you can't put fighting for a cause up to fighting for money, because eventually the money's not going to be enough and people are going to be like, nah, I really want to keep my life. Thanks so much. You keep the money. So then King George, he also forgets that he's on the offensive, and he says that the American colonists must either submit or triumph. Well, all triumph means in a defensive war is not give up. That's it. That's all it means. So they're like, the American colonists are like, you're right, buddy. We will triumph. We will take this. Don't you worry about it. Now, keep in mind, guys, we still have not, at this point, we still have not sent the Declaration of Independence, so technically we are not yet at war for independence. But we decide that we are going to go ahead and invade Canada. Now, this is right after the Quebec Act. It's kind of a way that we're going to stick it to the British for giving the people in Canada more freedoms and more representation than they give to the English colonies, the 13 colonies. Unfortunately for us, the invasion of Canada is a huge, huge American failure, because Benedict Arnold decides that he and Colonel Montgomery are going to fight the British way, and he wants to create a two-prong attack on Quebec. Now, the way Quebec is set up is it's actually a series of walls, of forts that you have to go through, and at each one, it's like above-ground trenches. Think of it like that. At each one, there's a line of British troops, right? So Benedict Arnold's idea is one flank is going to come from the south and directly hit them head-on, whereas Benedict Arnold's flank is going to come from the backside. He's going to, go north first and then come south into Canada. Now, Benedict Arnold estimates that it's going to take him 21 days to get from where he's at to Quebec, to his position where he needs to be. And so that's what he tells Montgomery. Well, Montgomery shows up in 21 days. But Benedict Arnold, he left a little later than he wanted to. And, oh yeah, it's winter. And he's headed into Canada in the wintertime. Hello. Anyway, Canadian winter will defeat most of Benedict Arnold's men. Half of them will die or turn back. And so the two prongs are not in sync, so it will be a huge failure. And they're attacking with fewer men. So most of the American colonists that are engaged in this battle that didn't die or turn back are captured. And yeah, Benedict Arnold is severely wounded, and Montgomery, he's shot in the head. Yay. All right. Now remember, I talked about how we have to retreat and lick our wounds, right? We have to regroup. So one of the ways that we regroup is we need to get supplies. We are low on supplies, and the British Navy is preventing any new materials and war materials from getting into the colonies. So the colonists decide that as a way to combat the fact that they don't have a navy, and they really don't have a government that can raise a navy, and they don't have the materials available to build a navy, they decide that they are going to incorporate privateers. Now, these privateers are smugglers. They're pirates. They're American pirates, and before they were engaged in illegal activity, and now they have been given the mantle of respectability by being called privateers, because they are now part of the American resistance. So they're authorized by the Continental Congress to use their smuggling skills to break the English naval line and actually trade goods with other countries. So this is going to be key. And it allows actually some foreign aid to come into the colonies. Thank goodness, we need it. Now, it is January 1776, and Thomas Paine, who had been here a couple of months, he's seeing all of this happening, this revolution. That's what it is, really, at this point. But there's still a huge majority of American colonists who are going, no, we don't want independence. We just want to reconcile with the British. We still want to be British, sort of, kind of. I mean, as long as they leave us alone and they don't tax us and they give us representation in Parliament, that works. We can still be British. And Paine, of course, says that's ridiculous. Use common sense. That's not going to work. You need to go ahead and separate for all of these reasons. All right? Now, this does make a huge impact on the sentiment in America. So we have 2.5 million people in the American colonies, and Thomas Paine sells 500,000 copies of this pamphlet. 500,000 people of 2.5 million actually took the time to go out and buy and read a 47-page pamphlet on the evils of monarchy and mercantilism, and it's really quite amazing what he was able to do with this. So anyway, in the meantime, the siege of Boston starts. Now, this is going to last many months, and George Washington is going to be at the head of it. He's going to take control of Dorchester Heights and lay siege to Boston. Dorchester Heights was on the other side. So, you had Bunkers Hill and Breed's Hill, and then you have Dorchester Heights. And here's where the artillery gained from the Battle of Ticonderoga becomes important, because they used those cannons to force the British Navy to retreat under heavy artillery fire out of the bay, out of the the harbor. And instead of going, you know what, we have this massive army, and we have this massive navy, and we have superior technology, and more, we outnumber these people, we're just going to go ahead and push through and, decimate them. General Howe retreats. He goes, oh my gosh, they're firing on us, we better back off. And he could have taken the American forces, but he was super paranoid because of Lexington and Concord, so he backed off. Thank God for us, right? Woohoo! So when he did that, it actually allowed us the time that we needed and to come to a decision, really. And it's in that time that we go ahead and issue the Declaration of Independence. Now, the Declaration of Independence, it was like its audience was the king and Parliament to say, hey, look, we're separating, deuces, peace out, whatever, and here are all the reasons why. But more than that, it was also to it was to explain to the world why the American colonies were rejecting the standard or traditional form of government of monarchy and imperialism and colonies and mercantilism. They're like, look, we tried to uphold our end of the bargain, but all of these horrible things were happening, and we can't stick with that. We cannot stay there. We cannot maintain that contract if the other side does not maintain their side of the bargain. Now, from the British perspective, they will say that we did not maintain our side of the bargain because, we did not really uphold the rules of mercantilism. We did not pay attention to any edicts that were handed down from Parliament. We did not accept any rules and regulations proposed by Parliament or the king. But really, that's their fault, right? Because they left us alone for so long that we kind of gained our own sense of self-government, and we didn't want to listen to them anymore. So, there you go. All right, here's the other thing. France, who was the major player, like, behind the scenes this whole time, and who wants some serious revenge against the British for the 7 Years' War and all the previous wars before, and for the fact that they got kicked out of North America. They want some serious revenge, but they want to make sure that the American colonies are there for sure. Like, they mean business, and they want them to dissolve any and all relationship with the English, with the British. So the Declaration of Independence is not just for the king and Parliament. It's not just for the rest of the world. It is specific. It is also specifically for France, because that was their requirement to then provide massive amounts of foreign aid and to actually recognize the colonies and then be able to give them loans and training and ships and to let them borrow the French Navy to compete against the British Navy. So this is very important. Now, that doesn't mean that the French are going to immediately get involved. No. They're still waiting. They want to make sure that this is actually a thing that's actually going to stick. So now they have that dissolved relationship. Now they're going to sit back and watch a little bit longer just to see what's going on. All right, at this point, the fighting, the battles, we are full on at war. We are about independence. We are about separation at this point. And the fighting moves to the middle colonies, and it moves to New York. So here are the battles of New York. George Washington is at the head. He's like leading the charge, except he's really just leading the retreat. Poor George Washington. He's awesome guy, right? I talked about him. He's pretty fantastic. But he's not that great of an actual military strategist. His logistics are really difficult for him when it comes to this. And he is pushed back again and again, and continuously the British army surrounds George Washington and forces him back. And so first it happens at Long Island, and then Lower Harlem, and then White Plains, and finally he's pushed into New Jersey. Now at this point, the British, remember when King George said that the Americas were in rebellion, and he hired those Hessians. At this point, there are 32,000 British troops in the area, and they control not only land, but they control the water and the harbor. They control all of the water, so they control the sea and the harbor. And so Americans are outnumbered. They're surrounded on all sides, and it's really kind of a difficult position to be in. Anyway, here's the problem, though, at least from the British perspective. Now, the British, again, could have pushed forward, and every time they surrounded George Washington and forced him to retreat, they also withdrew. So here's the crazy thing. What they could have done to really just end the whole thing was, when he was retreating, just keep pushing and keep throwing everything they had at him until they completely wiped out the colonial army and and that's what they don't do. So I find that kind of crazy, right? Because they're like, oh, we don't need to. They'll give up eventually. But they keep forgetting that we don't have to. We're not the ones that have to completely eradicate the rebellion. They are. They forget what role they're playing in this war. And it's the craziest thing. But here's the thing. Here's the greatest part. So what's great about George Washington is that he refuses to accept defeat, which is why he is so inspiring to so many people, is that he doesn't let mistakes or failures get him down, and he doesn't ever lose sight of that end goal, which is independence and separation. And so here he is. He's in New Jersey, and he knows it's Christmas. And over in Trenton, New Jersey, there is a huge group of Hessians. And, it's Christmas Eve, so they're partying it up. They're having a great time. They think it's a ceasefire, it's a truce, because, it's a holiday. I mean, who's going to be celebrating on Christmas Eve, right? Or who's going to be fighting on Christmas Eve? Everyone's going to be celebrating. So they get, kind of drunk and wasted, and so George Washington knows that this is going to happen. He knows that this is going on, so he decides that this is the perfect time to launch a surprise attack. And so while he and his men get into dark boats, and they have to sit low in the boats, and they cross the Delaware River in the middle of the night with very little light, and patches of ice everywhere. And at the same time, he's got Ewing, one of his lieutenants and colonels or whatever, to seize the ferry, preventing the British Navy from coming in to protect them. So these Hessians, they don't have any naval support. So it's just them against, the American colonists who are sneaking into Trenton to take over. And so they set up, while the Hessians are still asleep, they set up artillery in the streets, and then they wake these Hessians up in a surprise attack. So as they woke, they were struck down, they were captured, they were imprisoned, and at this point, there were very few dead, very few wounded, but listen to this, 22 dead on the British side, 98 wounded, and 1,000 captured. That's a huge chunk of that area that is taken out of commission just because they decided to party it up on Christmas Eve and the American colonists decided not to. Here are the American casualties. 4. 4 were wounded. 0 dead. 4 wounded. 0 captured. Go George Washington. Toot-toot. Yes, it's exciting. All right, so this is a huge win. We go ahead and move on to Princeton, and we take Princeton as well, and it allows the Americans to actually move back into New York. So the British know that this is happening. They know that the Americans are back in New York, and so they decide that they are going to come up with this really complicated 3-prong attack for New York, and they're going to try and approach Albany from 3 different directions. So they've got General Howe coming up from New York City, from up the Hudson Valley. They've got St. Ledger coming in from the Mohawk River Valley from the west and moving in east. And then they've got Burgoyne coming from the north, coming from Canada. So they're all just going to meet at Albany all at the same time and attack simultaneously. Now that's pretty complicated considering it's not like you have phones or internet or any way to really communicate other than people on foot, right? So, or on horseback or whatever, and all of that can be intercepted. And it failed. It was a huge failure for the British because they divided their forces, and so it actually made it easier for the colonists to attack them in smaller numbers. Now, if they had united first and then struck Albany, then they would have outnumbered the colonists and would have easily defeated them. But because they divided, they were in smaller groups. And remember, the colonists are now fighting guerrilla tactics, so they're like picking them off one by one as they're going along. And here's the other thing. 2 prongs fail to even make it. All right? So this failed three-prong attack actually leads to the Battle of Saratoga. And the Battle of Saratoga is super important because it is the turning point of the American Revolution. Now, two prongs failed to make it. Okay? Howe went south to Philadelphia. He completely disobeyed orders. He did not go where he was supposed to go. He was like, nah, I think that's dumb. I'm headed to Pennsylvania. St. Ledger was attacked by natives along the way because I don't know if you're aware of this, but there are a ton of Native American tribes in the Mohawk River Valley. So him making it through without unaccosted was unrealistic, especially as these were Native Americans that were anti-British. So they were more than happy to help the colonists out and defeat the British, with the idea that they would be taken care of in some way, which, by the way, they will not. That promise will get broken. And then, Burgoyne defies orders, and he chose to travel overland. Now, he was supposed to go use the river, which would have been faster, and it would have used the Navy. And he decided, nah, I don't need to do that. I'm not going to. So he takes 3 weeks instead of 1 to get where he needs to go because he decides to go by land. Now, this is great for the colonists because it actually gives them time to gather forces and supplies to regroup after, Trenton and Princeton and some other smaller battles. And so Burgoyne, despite the fact that the other two prongs don't make it, he decides he's going to push forward anyway. And, yeah, he's forced to surrender at this point. So this particular battle is pretty massive because it increases colonial morale. Because for a while there, we were losing and losing and losing, and it was taking forever. And, everyone who starts a war thinks it's going to end quickly, and they want it to end quickly. And people have a really hard time with delayed gratification. This is not a new phenomenon. But at the end of this, what they have is we had 6,300 British versus 11,000 American colonists. 600 are killed or wounded on the British side, and 5,300 are captured. 5,300 are captured. That's crazy. So now we have, Trenton where 1,000 were captured, and then we have Saratoga where 5,300 were captured. These are major blows to the British Army. On the American side, they had 11,000 troops, 50 were killed, 150 were wounded, and 0 were captured. So ultimately a huge, huge blow to the British, and it's this battle that the French have been waiting for to really throw in their hat, to really get in on the side of the colonists. So this battle will hasten French aid. It will also lead to the Franco-American alliance, which would one day cause some serious problems. But here's what they each get. France will get revenge against the British. Yay. And they believed that the Franco-American alliance was a marriage of convenience, and they wanted to make sure that the American rebellion would not fizzle out. So they're going to help America. America, in return, they send the official Declaration of Independence, and they say that this Franco-American alliance basically says that we will be allies forever. Can you see the problems with this? Because saying that you're going to be friends forever is a bit premature when you're literally talking about forever. Well, maybe not literally, but you're talking about a really long time. You're talking about, and not even knowing what's going to happen. Anything could happen that could lead to a break in relations between the French and Americans. But unfortunately, we have this alliance that everyone signed that said we're going to be allies forever, as long as the two countries exist. So that's pretty huge, right? All right. But once France gets involved, what's going to happen is the entire world is going to go to war with Britain. And remember, the Irish are causing problems too. Thank you, Irish. Right? All right. Now, here we hit the Battle of Valley Forge. George Washington, not the Battle of Valley Forge. It's wintertime. And George Washington and his men decide to settle in for the winter at Valley Forge. Now, this is where the Prussian General von Steuben will use this time to really whip George Washington and his men into shape. And he will become a trusted advisor for George Washington for years to come. And he'll actually write the drill manual that the U.S. will adopt until through the War of 1812. So it's a very important piece of American history. And if you would like to look at it, although I think I've already loaned it out, but I have a facsimile copy of that drill manual. It's very cool. I enjoyed the read, but I'm kind of a history nerd, so whatever. At the same time, while the Americans are, settling in Valley Forge for the winter, the British are setting up their headquarters in New York. Now, this is dumb, all right? Because at this point, you've got colonial militia in New England, and you've got colonial militia in, the South. So putting your headquarters in New York puts you in the middle of two hostile colonial contingencies. So this is going to be kind of awesome for the colonists anyway. And so what they're going to do is Clark, who is a colonial leader, he's going to take it from the west. Jones is another colonial leader, is going to take it from the sea. And the French and Spanish are openly sending aid, which allows all of these people to come in. So here it is. We have people coming in we have a contingency from the north, a contingency from the south, a contingency from the west, and a contingency from the east. And, although it may be switched for y'all, whatever. Anyway, so this forces the British to retreat out of the middle colonies entirely. Woohoo, big victory. Yay, right? All right, so what they do is the British then decide, they get on their boats and they head south. And they head all the way down to Georgia. They extricate themselves from the situation and they move south. Now, why would they move south? The South is the last place, their last stronghold of loyalists. Now, remember when I talked about the fact that the Americans were not united and it was a disadvantage for them in this war. And the British are going to take advantage of that disadvantage, and they're going to try and utilize the Southern Loyalists. Here's the problem. The Southern Loyalists, there's about 50,000 of them, but unfortunately they have a huge contingency of people underneath them that are very discontented with the elitist system within those Loyalist colonies, like Georgia, like South Carolina. So, we'll see. So at this point, the British are trying to move north from Georgia to Virginia. Virginia is where there's a colonial contingency that is quite hostile. And they capture Savannah, and they're trying to gain supplies. And it's going pretty well for them. They actually have some wins. They defeat the colonial armies in Charleston and Camden. Unfortunately, the Americans are able to weaken the British, and they are forced to retreat to the coast. Now, at this point, they don't even have all of the southern colonies. They just have a little piece of it, the coastal piece of the southern colonies. And unfortunately, this puts the British on the defensive. So all the colonists had to do was keep pushing them completely off the land. And the British, they just couldn't hold any area. So now, the problem is that not only did the British not achieve their goal of completely decimating the rebellion as an offensive war requires, they couldn't even hold a position. They could hold no position anywhere in the colonies at this point, despite having some advantages, despite having more money, despite having more supplies, despite having loyalists, despite all of the disadvantages against the colonists. And they're like, you know what, this is just not worth it. And so they go ahead and the British surrender at Yorktown. And Lord Cornwallis was forced to surrender to Washington and Rochambeau. And by the way, somebody asked about the famous naval person. That's Rochambeau. I'm pretty sure that's who you were thinking of. I don't remember who asked me, but I think that's who you're thinking of. And then Admiral de Grassy's French fleet in the Chesapeake Bay helped Washington actually accept that surrender and negotiate that surrender. And so then all of our diplomats and our leaders, we all moved to Paris. And we write and sign the Treaty of Paris of 1783 that ends the American Revolution and gives Americans their independence. Woohoo! Now, the Treaty of Paris of 1783 is actually very kind to the colonists. Great Britain recognizes the independence of the United States. Bonus. The U.S. acquires all of that territory from Canada to Florida, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River. The British get to keep Canada. All right? So they still get to keep that. But there's a lot of snow up there. I don't know if you're aware of that. And now the Mississippi River, now that we are not under the mercantilist system anymore, we can openly trade with the Spanish using the Mississippi River, which is huge for us. It opens trade for both parties, for the British and for the Americans. Spain receives the territory of Florida for their help. And Florida at this point is not just how we think of Florida. It's like the southern coastline of the Gulf of Mexico, and the tail of Florida. So it's like all of that, all the way to Louisiana to New Orleans and Texas and all that stuff. So that's when the Spanish receive Florida back. And at this point, the French are actually going to get parts of North America back for their help. And the Continental Congress, which is the only governing body that the colonies have at this point, and it's not really a governing body. It's just kind of a war council, basically, that are making decisions as needed for the war. And it really didn't have any power to create legislation or raise taxes or raise an army or really do anything. Other than have a place for a consensus for the colonies. Just keep that in mind. But the Continental Congress was to request that the states repay the Loyalists for damages incurred during the war. Now, again, I just said they don't really have any powers, so they can request all they want to, but the colonists are not going to pay those Loyalists back. In fact, the Loyalists better run. Right? What did y'all say in first period? Snitches get stitches? Yeah. So the Loyalists better run. Yeah. All right. So American fishermen were permitted to fish off the coast of Newfoundland and the mouth of the St. Lawrence River. Now, this is huge because this is a really good place for fishing, and fishing is a major industry for those northern colonies. So the Treaty of Paris is very nice to us, but what you should notice about the Treaty of Paris is that it doesn't actually... It leaves a lot up in the air. Like, it doesn't set a northern border exactly where the cutoff is for Britain and for America. It does not make that clear. It does not make it clear, really, like who's going to get paid back and who owes who money and what's going to happen there. So this is going to cause some problems later on down the road. So keep all that in mind. But for now, we are free. Free! Yay! All right. See you guys next time.